Good morning. Good morning, everyone. You are here to the people who are following via the live stream. From the bell, you know that we are live.
We are live.
So it is really a great pleasure for me to carry on with these bicentennial historical lectures. Most of you have the wonderful brochure which our communication department has put together. And we have reached a series of 3 lectures which I was very much looking forward to by Bishop Bill Franklin, who happens to be also a very good friend.
Nice.
Very, very grateful for his friendship and his more than his willingness, his enthusiasm for
Yes.
the topic of St. Thomas,
Yes.
for these
Yes,
lectures,
that's true.
which has energized me, by the way, as a result. So it's really wonderful. So the topic of the lecture, you know it already, is Bishop John Henry Hobart and the founding of St. Thomas Church. And just words about Bishop William Franklin. He teaches a Union Theological Seminary here in New York, and he is the assisting bishop of the Diocese of Long Island. Thank you very much, Bishop Bill.
Thank you
And
for your very much
it's over to you.
for your invitation
It's a
and
pleasure.
working together on this. And thank you so much for being here today. It's a very difficult act to follow John Meacham. To tell you. So you don't want to ever be in that situation. So here you are, and I hope to see you for the next 2 lectures. There are going to be 3. This is the first one. And I think the timing for this lecture is just right, because not only are we celebrating today the part of the 200th anniversary of St. Thomas Church, but yesterday, the 17th Bishop of New York, Matt Hyde, was installed at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine yesterday. It was a wonderful service. Some of you were there. The cathedral was absolutely jammed, which was a wonderful feeling that so many people had come to see this happen. And it was a very, very interesting service. It's not exactly what people expected, I think, some aspects of it. But there were wonderful readings. And another thing is that there were great tributes, I think, through the whole event, of saying this diocese has had many great bishops through its history. Bishops of all kinds, some not so good, but most of them have been among the best group of bishops probably in the history of the Episcopal Church. So I feel honored today, and I give great thanks to Father Luigi to be able to do the first of these lectures with you. As he mentioned, I'm both an academic and a bishop. I'm a historian and a bishop. And so in my line of work, I get often invitations to come and speak at anniversaries of churches, usually old churches. I'm going to Philadelphia for the 175th anniversary of St. Mark's Church. I'm going to Williamsburg for the Bruton Parish Church, 350 years. But I had the most interesting experience on January 21st, because I am a bishop in Long Island. What do bishops do on Sunday? We go and visit churches. We do confirmation, we celebrate the Eucharist. And on this occasion, this church in Plainview, Long Island, founded in 1963, a suburban church from that era of suburbanization. It was the 60th anniversary. And they had a wonderful celebration of the 60th anniversary. Great service, and even better food. I mean, I'd never been to a coffee hour in my life that had such good wine. I'm just telling you, it was extraordinary. So they said, will you come back for a seminary service right before the Holy Week? And I said, absolutely. If you have the wine that you had on that other occasion, I'll be back whenever you invite me. So they won the prize for that. But they also won the prize, I think, in the fact that there were maybe 25 founders of the church who were there at that service. Usually people aren't there, of course, for 350 years they're not going to be there. There were 25 people who had founded the church, who paid for the church, who had kept it going for the 60 years. And they were honored, and there were tears in their eyes when they got up to speak. And that went on a bit. But it was still wonderful. And that's what I think is so important about what St. Thomas has done. You have honored not only bishops, priests, and deacons, but lay people. Bill Haas, my longtime friend, G. William Haas, who's been over time your warden and member of the vestry, you honored him at your gala. So I think that this is what I'm trying to do in these lectures, is honor a variety of people who have made St. Thomas Church. And I do this amidst a plethora of great events that are going on right now. The 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party, 1773. In 2026, we'll observe the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So in some ways, my theme of all of these lectures is we the people. And I think I connect to Meacham in that I'm saying that I'm giving these lectures on these topics at a moment when we all know, no matter what our political parties are, that we're at a moment when we're thinking about democracy in the United States. And we're thinking about what is the future of democracy? What is it going to be like? That was very much an issue at the time of the founding of this church. And it was very much an issue at the time of the building of this church. And so as we go through this, I want us to be thinking about this spiritually in relationship to what is the church going to do as we think about our own future. The story of St. Thomas is very much one of the adaptation of the Anglican tradition, which we had received both from the Church of England, but also from the Episcopal Church of Scotland. That's where our first bishop, Seabury, was consecrated, Scotland and England. How did we receive these? And then how did the newly independent 13 colonies in the United States adapt to trying to save Anglicanism? Because to be frank to everybody in the room, maybe this shouldn't go out over the wire, but we were on the wrong side in the American Revolution, as you well know. We were the Church of England. In truth, the Episcopal Church almost disappeared. In 1800, there were only 10,000 Episcopalians in the entire United States. Think about that. And people thought that would just go the way for other denominations in the past, had just closed down and disappeared. Before the Revolution, the Church of England had been the state church in 5 of the colonies. It was the state church in New York, as you well know. Columbia was founded by George II as King's College. I was talking to a kid in the Columbia gym where I go to run and do yoga, which I hate doing. My wife come out and has made me do this. But it's interesting to have, so I was saying, I'm going to give this lecture, and I'm going to talk about George II. He said, who is George II? I said, well, you know, he was really the founder of Columbia. Oh, well, who is George III? And I said, we don't want to talk about that today. But after the Revolution, thousands of Anglican clergy left the new United States. The Church of England stopped giving money, obviously, to the church in this country. So we lost endowments, clergy, educational institutions, and laity. That's when Columbia changed its name from King College to Columbia College and then Columbia University. And it's interesting, and I know a number of people in here are graduates of Columbia. Columbia, of course, is very connected to the history of our church in New York City. You know that, leaders. And we don't talk enough about that. I wish Columbia talked. My wife teaches, I'm going to try to get her to twist the new president. Maybe the new president will take the Episcopal Church seriously. I'm not sure that will ever happen. But the Church of England withdrew all support as loyalists to the British Empire, left for Canada, England, and the Caribbean. In post-revolutionary years, the newly born Episcopal Church faced the anxiety and disillusion of Anglicans who became attracted to other faiths. And so people just started leaving us and going to other churches. The second bishop to be consecrated for our church in 1787, the first after Samuel Seabury. Seabury went ultimately to Scotland to be consecrated by 4 bishops of the Episcopal Church of Scotland, which still exists. And then William White went and was consecrated by the Archbishop of Canterbury. So ultimately, our apostolic succession, which is very important to the Hobartian tradition, comes first from Scotland, the Episcopal Church of Scotland, not the Church of Scotland, which is Presbyterian. So let's not get into that today, all right? And then also then from the Archbishop of Canterbury. The first Bishop of New York and the first Bishop of Philadelphia, of Pennsylvania, Bishop White, were both consecrated by the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Archbishop of York. So that's where our succession came from. White was our George Washington. He actually looked like George Washington. If you see portraits of Bishop White, I should have brought one today. He looks just like George Washington. And in fact, George Washington was his parishioner in Philadelphia, because White was the rector of Christ Church in Philadelphia, which was the largest Anglican church in the 13 colonies. And it was so large they had to build another church about 10 blocks away, who people didn't want to walk to all the way to Christ Church, and they went to that other church. So he was the rector. He was the rector his entire career. Where does the salary come from? Not from being the bishop of Pennsylvania, not from becoming the presiding bishop. The presiding bishop only got $500 a year, so you can't live on that. But he was the rector of this great church. And in 1782, he published a little pamphlet called The Case of the Episcopal Churches in the United States Considered. And he raised the question, how can this church survive if we are no longer connected to the British Crown? Because as everybody in the room knows, the authority of the British Crown over the church was very great. It's so great, I'm on a Bible study group with some other bishops, and the suffragan bishop of Oxford is on the group, and he told the group, well, he said, I've got to retire in a year, and I would like to stay one more year in my job. In order to do that, I have to write a letter to the king. Can you imagine that still? In the Episcopal Church, we certainly don't write a letter to the king, right? We write a letter to somebody on 815 2nd Avenue. So the authority was in the hands of the crown. But in the case of the Episcopal churches, White cleverly, a work of genius, said, I'm going to use the same theology, the same ecclesiology, the same ideology of the American Constitution and apply it to the Episcopal Church. And what is that? That the authority rests in the people, okay? We the people. And that's the basis of our church as well. The people elect the bishops. The people elect the representatives of our church who go to the General Convention, which is our ultimate governing body, which meets every 3 years. It's about to meet in June, and we'll elect a new presiding bishop. But everybody who goes there has been elected by the people of the diocese, delegates who go to your diocesan convention to elect. So it's a democratic system. So if somebody could say, oh, well, is this against the Christian tradition? It is not, because in the early church, the people elected the bishops. In the Church of Rome, into the early Middle Ages, the people acclaimed the person who had been chosen to be pope by gathering in front of St. Peter's. They still do that. They don't vote anymore, as you well know. But this was the genius of White. We must be seen as a church that matches the basic structures of the United States, or we're going to go out of business. But, very important but here, a key to everything we're talking about today, we combined democracy with the Catholic tradition of the ancient church. White said, this is a clever thing, more people should use this in explaining our church. The Episcopal Church is like the United States Capitol in one sense. It represents, as our Capitol's dome does, democracy. But then we put on top of that the Catholic tradition of St. Peter's in Rome. Isn't that, I think that's a clever way of thinking about it. In other words, we are really the combination, the synthesis of two great domes. Our Capitol, which represents democracy, which is part of our church, but the Catholic tradition, which represents the Catholic tradition, St. Peter's in Rome represents. I don't know, they might not like that. We're using this to explain this. This is important because all of this in understanding what is this tradition that was coming to us from White, because guess who laid the cornerstone for St. Thomas Church, for the first St. Thomas Church in 1824? Bishop White, not Bishop Hobart. So he is your foundation, I think. And that's part of the lecture, is so people who know who these figures are. And when he laid this foundation on July 27th, 1824, this is what White said: "We are assembled to lay the first stone of a building intended, if God should prosper the undertaking, to be hereafter consecrated exclusively to the duties of devotion, that the intended building may contribute to eternal interests. Let us invoke the blessing of Almighty God on the long-standing future of St. Thomas Church." And he was right, because here it is now. White meant by the democratic strain of the church, alongside the eternal interests of the church, was this whole pattern that the clergy and the laity work together to choose leaders. But he also believed, White believed, this Hobart believed, that this Catholic strain is very important. And what does that mean for us? If you want to invite somebody to become an Episcopalian, you can say, the Catholic strain means that we believe that our bishops are in succession from the apostles, the apostolic succession, that ultimately the apostolic succession is our link to the early church, to Jesus' apostle. And it's passed down through the early church, through the Church of England, and then on to us. And so, for example, when I was consecrated a bishop, I was given a number, 1057. If you want to break into my bank account, that's my bank account. If you want to break into our apartment, 1057 is me. But I'm 1005-7 in the line of people who have been consecrated bishop in our church, in this line that then goes back to the Church of England all the way to the early church. But also, the second thing is that we are a church that believes in 3 orders of ministry: bishops, priests, and deacons. Most Protestant denominations have just one order of ordained people, but we have 3, because we see that in continuity with the ancient church. We take baptism seriously, but we believe that baptism actually brings a grace to people. One of the differences between this Hobartian tradition and the Protestant evangelical tradition is the Protestant believe, evangelicals, that you have to have a conversion experience at some time in your life. That's what makes you a Christian. Hobart and White believe that it is baptism which imparts a grace to you, that makes you part of the body of Christ. That is the initiation in the church. We take that extremely seriously, and the centrality of the Holy Eucharist in the life of the church. Not that they were opposed to preaching, but they said the point is really not preaching. The point is really to gather together for the sacrament. So that was White's model. That was Hobart's model. So if Bishop White was the St. Peter of this new church, in quotes, this new church, we're really not a new church, but we're just a continuity for America church. If White was the St. Peter, John Henry Hobart was the St. Paul, who said, we've got to build this church. We cannot just sit here and be a little tiny minority, but we have to bring people to us. Hobart was born also in Philadelphia in 1775. His father was a ship captain from New England who came to Philadelphia. The Hobarts also were members of Christ Church in Philadelphia. White, the rector. And then Hobart in his life was baptized, confirmed, ordained as a deacon, ordained as a priest, and consecrated as a bishop, all by Bishop White. So you could say he's White's protege. Hobart became a traveling advocate of White's new American Anglicanism. He was a type A personality. He crisscrossed New York State from the Atlantic Ocean, all out in Long Island. We have in Long Island churches that were founded by Hobart, all the way to Western New York, where I was once the bishop, also founded by Hobart. All over the state, most small towns, if they have an Episcopal church, they were probably built by Hobart, founded by Hobart. In 1801, Hobart became the minister and then the rector of Trinity Church, Wall Street, and he was made that through his time as bishop. So where did money come from for a lot of these churches? From Trinity Church, Wall Street. He sent money to them. The first black church, St. Philip's Church, money came from Trinity via Hobart. In 1811, he was elected the assisting bishop, the office that I hold now, and then he became the diocesan bishop, as Matt Hyde did yesterday, in 1816. And then for 19 years, he worked hard to build up the church. By 1830, when he died, New York State had more Episcopalians than any other part of the United States, so we were kind of the Episcopal state. This newly born Episcopal Church was overshadowed by the evangelical movement, which had become the dominant form of Christianity in America. Western New York, where I was the bishop, was called the burned over district because there were all these evangelicals up there who were having revival meetings and who were trying to spread this basic message of that movement. Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians were winning converts to a church that was based on, number one, minimal liturgy. Let's get rid of this boring liturgy, they would say. Come to us. Number two, you must have a record, almost like a register record, of that you've had a conversion experience. People would write in their Bible the date that they had this conversion on the spot. You had to say, I had a conversion at this time. And you said, oh, by the way, I don't think this ever happened. People say, well, you better work on getting your conversion going. Also, moral behavior. They wanted strict moral behavior, opposed to drinking, opposed to gambling, opposed to duels. Okay. So the evangelical movement, like our own time, if I might say, sort of off the record here, was very much interested in political power. We think that's only something of our own time. It is not. They were interested in controlling the moral behavior of Americans. Doesn't that sound slightly familiar? And White believed, and Hobart believed that was something the Episcopal Church should stand against. So if I seem excited about Hobart, I am. He founded Hobart College in upstate New York, in Geneva, to make college students who will be Episcopalians, who will go out to small town America and be leaders with an Episcopal point of view. And guess to whom they would fight? I shouldn't be going out, I guess, online saying all this about this, but this was part of, he said, we have to stand for a different tradition. And what are the freedoms? The Episcopal Church has to stand for freedom. The freedom from the necessity to have a conversion experience. All Christians, some people do, they're legitimate, but other people have many conversions in their life. Number two, that you don't have to sign some sort of elaborate theological creed to be in the Episcopal Church. You have basic understanding of the Christian faith. You also do not have to go out and fight for various political causes. We can be a church that invites a variety of people. Our politics should be varied. And finally, the importance of science. Think about that. Again, that's being so challenged in our own time. So this was our leader. And St. Thomas, as you can see, I think, was fit exactly in this. St. Thomas would be an outpost in New York City that represented this understanding of our faith. So onto this stage stepped Hobart, who was known as the cute bishop. Okay, that's why I wanted you to make sure you saw his picture. Okay, all right. So he was, that's kind of a contradiction in terms, but he was known as the cute bishop. You know, he was young, he was short, he was very good in, socializing. He couldn't see very well. So if you look at the picture there, he wore glasses. And this is an interesting thing about him, having said so much about he was so opposed to the evangelical tradition. In those days, to prove that you were an Episcopalian, you read your sermon. And the more boring it was, the more Episcopalian you wanted to be, all right? Because he couldn't see very well, he would, sort of like I am right now, he sort of gets excited about what he's talking about, and he would not be able to really calm himself down. So he seemed un-Episcopalian almost, in that he would go onto the pulpit. And people would like that. He had a big social life, and I'm going to put this, I guess you can't turn that off now, but a Roman Catholic nun has written a PhD dissertation at Union, which I found in the library there, which claims that Hobart had a platonic relationship with St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. Yes, that Mother Seton and Bishop Hobart maybe had a little thing going out there. I don't know how serious it was, but it's part of the story, I think. That she was a member of the upper class, and a lot of upper class people at St. Thomas. He met her. Her husband died. Didn't go so far, so she went to Italy and became a nun. But let's not go into that again. That would have to be on another occasion, I think. But I'm trying to say to you that this part of the church grew because of his personality, I think. Think of him out there. For 19 years, he devoted himself to advancing his vision of what he said was being a high church Episcopalian. He used that term. And what does high church mean here? Everything I'm describing about believing in the Catholic tradition of our church, the importance of liturgy, the importance of music. He confirmed 15,000 Episcopalians in his time. And he said, we stand for freedom. Freedom from having to have a conversion experience, freedom from a creed, freedom from no drinking, and freedom from fearing science. The four freedoms. Remember, FDR had the four freedoms, and Hobart had the four freedoms. I don't think FDR ever read any of Hobart, but he might have got this idea. In his most famous book, An Apology for Apostolic Order, 1870, Hobart unveiled the motto of the high church movement. My banner is evangelical truth, but apostolic order. In other words, we preach the gospel. We want to bring people in, but we want to have them in the context of our structure of the Catholic Church, the ancient church. Bishops in succession of the apostles, saving grace communicated by baptism, not by an emotional conversion experience, all of which were the founding principles of St. Thomas. The beauty of holiness, more frequent celebrations of the Holy Eucharist, already back then. This is the context in which your parish was born. So the first St. Thomas Church, whose cornerstone was laid by Bishop White on July 27, 1824, was fully molded by White's student, John Henry Hobart. And the first St. Thomas Church building was consecrated by Bishop Hobart himself in February 1826. And the first sermon preached in any St. Thomas Church building was organized by his principles. He preached a sermon on basically what I'm trying to preach to you today. Sounds like Bill is being nasty, but I'm just saying that what he preached was he reproached non-liturgical worship, saying that every mutilation of the liturgy we promise to countermand, and we promise to preserve entire every aspect of the liturgy, just not get rid of parts of it. Number two, every presumptuous introduction of our own effusions into that full and impressive service by which the wisest and best have deemed it to be an honor and privilege to be regulated, and which the most solemn obligation guards from the exercise of unhallowed, non-liturgical withdrawal. Do you hear what he's saying? These are kind of boring words, but they have an important message. Liturgy is important. Following the Book of Common Prayer is important. Does that sound a bit like St. Thomas? I think it does. A word picture of the early American Gothic style of the first St. Thomas Church is provided to us by a young boy whose name was Arthur Cleveland Cox. He was 10 years old. And by the way, he would go on to be a Hobartian, and later he was the second bishop of Western New York. I was the 11th bishop of Western. So this is a little kid, 10 years old, who went down and stood in front of the new St. Thomas Church. And this is what he wrote. This is moving to me, at least to me. St. Thomas was the Gothic Church, and how magnificent it appeared to me. It looked like a sort of castle with its 2 towers and its stone walls. I imagined it to be a small Westminster Abbey. The beautiful, adorned pulpit far above the great organ loft from which the music came down with sweet influence and fine effect. Isn't that a lovely passage? I mean, you could be saying that about today, I think, with fine effect. I mean, Hobart sort of had a way, I think, with children, because there was another 10-year-old kid whose name was William Whittingham, who was another Hobartian. He took the Hobartian tradition to Maryland, and he went to Hobart's office when he was 10 years old and said, Bishop Hobart, would you confirm me on the spot? And Hobart gave him a kind of an exam on theology. Did he believe these things I've been talking about? And on the spot, Bishop Hobart confirmed him. And this kid went on to teach at General Seminary, and then he went on to be this great Bishop of Maryland, taking all these principles. So here is the person. Now, the problem with the person that I just read what he said about the church, he fired the 4th Bishop of Western New York for putting candles on the altar. So he thought that was going too far. And this was Brent. And Brent consecrated your famous rector Stiers and preached the sermon at his consecration at St. Thomas Church. So 2 connections to Western New York I had to tell you about. But one, and the connection of them, because the kid who looked at the church also fired Bishop Brent, who said, to hell with Western New York. And he left and went to Boston and then came back as the bishop. But that's another story, which doesn't quite fit into this class today. Who was the first rector, and how does he fit into this story? His name was Cornelius Roosevelt Duffy, and he was a fervent Hobartian. When Hobart instituted him at St. Thomas, Hobart said, we hope, we are confident that the word of God will be here proclaimed and his ministrations and ordinances duly celebrated by him who becomes now your new rector, and through his ministrations of God's grace, above all, to the people of this parish. Cornelius Roosevelt Duffy was elected rector of St. Thomas at 35. He was born in Manhattan in March 1789. He went to Columbia. He studied law. He served in the United States Navy in the War of 1812. And he was brought up a Baptist. He was in an evangelical surrounding. One day, like many people who come into the Episcopal Church, he went to a funeral in an Episcopal church. And he thought the service was so wonderful that he stole a copy of the Book of Common Prayer. I'm not making this up. And he felt converted to the Episcopal Church on the spot. He went to Trinity Wall Street, and there Bishop Hobart confirmed him. In 1816, Duffy married Helen Bleecker, yes, of the Bleecker family of Bleecker Street. She died in 1821 after the birth of their 5th child. Duffy was ordained a priest by Hobart in 1823, and Hobart immediately said, you're going to be the rector of St. Thomas, and sent him to St. Thomas because he was such a Hobartian. That first rector was a beloved pastor. The late scholar and theologian J. Robert Wright, who was very much a part of your life, says of him, he was quiet, simple, friendly, a soul that was deeply, deeply religious. He had suffered much in his short life, the loss of many children, the loss of his wife. But White says this suffering was a means of his saintliness. In 4 years at St. Thomas, he baptized 102 adults. He buried 58 adults, so he was more baptisms than funerals. That's pretty good. He officiated at 27 marriages. His confirmation classes often had more than 30 adult confirmands as he was bringing. St. Thomas, the doorway into the Episcopal Church. That goes all the way back as being a place that people felt they very much could be a form of Christianity that they could love. Robert Wright explains what happened next. As everything was going so well for the infant congregation of St. Thomas Church, fortune took a turn. On August the 5th, 1827, Duffy preached what would turn out to be his last sermon, saying, "God grant us grace that we may not fear to die." And suddenly he was seized by typhoid fever, and on August 20th, 1827, he died. So he was here for 4.5 years. Bishop Hobart reportedly burst into tears at the news of Father Duffy's death. At the New York Diocesan Convention, a few months later, Bishop Hobart noted the wide, strong expression of grief over the unexpected and premature removal of this beloved clergyman from the life of the Diocese of New York. A loss. So St. Thomas, again, playing a role that its rector being lost would make a hole in the whole life of the diocese, which I think is true. Before the convention of the diocese, Hobart acknowledged his own particular reasons to lament the early death at the age of 38 of one who was congenial, Hobart said, with all of his views in all ecclesiastical concerns, absolutely faithful to our tradition. Duffy. I hope you remember him as you go through this anniversary. 2.5 years later, Bishop Hobart himself was dead at the age of 55. Why? I think he just completely wore himself out trying to build this church. It was a bleeding ulcer, but it may have been caused by overwork. It was in upstate New York, and I used to think he froze to death on a visitation, because I certainly got cold plenty of times up there, but actually it was September the 12th, 1830. September the 12th was the day of Hobart's death. September the 12th is the day of his feast day, which I hope you'll keep at St. Thomas. Hobart was buried under the altar of Trinity Church, Wall Street, not far from Alexander Hamilton, who lies buried also in the Trinity Churchyard. Next time you go down to Wall Street and go in Trinity Church, you should visit his resting place. Go into the church, walk down the left aisle all the way to the back, and there will find a beautiful, beautiful carved marble sculpture of Hobart dying in the arms of a female representation of the faith. Wonderful. You can't get down to the tomb, but I saw somebody at the service yesterday who said, "Bill, I'm going to get you down there. Since you're an advocate of Hobart, you need to see where he is." Where he is under the high altar. And when the Twin Towers collapsed on the morning of September 11, 2001, his tomb was shaken and broken and damaged and has to be seriously repaired. But not his power to inspire St. Thomas Church in the 19th century, and not his power to inspire us today. Thanks be to God. Actually, we have 8 minutes for questions. Anybody want to? I'll be at the coffee hour after the service, and so I'll be happy to ask another question. But we have just a moment.
We have just the quick kind of to the point question.
Yeah, quick to the point.
Anyone would like to say?
Yes.
Please.
You mentioned he had an interest in science.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Not too much, except that in founding Hobart College, which he really did create the curriculum and everything, he emphasized very much scientific education for the young leaders he thought would go out and be Episcopal lawyers, Episcopal doctors. And so he wanted Episcopalians to be people of science. And that was contrary to other popular opinions. And the same thing at General Seminary. I mean, he founded General too, I should have said. I didn't say that. So he saw General as his other place of forming clergy who would go out with this high church point of view. That's why Virginia Seminary was formed down in 1823 down in Virginia, to be the evangelical. All right, this is why for me it's sort of not so great that Virginia Seminary has taken over General Seminary. But that's another story. I will not get into it. Yeah.
Compared to the 19th century to today, would you see any differences between the high and low church divide? Like, has it changed the front lines and kind of like what divides high from low over time?
Yeah, it's not as strong as it was in the 19th century. I mean, the two parties were at war, and the way that they got to one another was put on trial bishops from the other party. So after Hobart died, his successor was charged with misdemeanors of abuse of rectors' wives, and ultimately he never was removed from the ministry. But if you look at the program yesterday, it'll show that he was removed from being the Bishop of New York. So that was worse than today. But we're still different, I think. I think both of our Long Island and you, we still have people would say we are high church diocese. St. George's, which was J.P. Morgan's church, was a big evangelical church in your diocese. And we had some too. But we don't bitterly fight so much, I don't think. I think our liturgies are much closer. But that's a very good question. The parties exist. Then there was finally a third party, the liberal party, called the Broad Church Party. But after the Civil War, we had divided as a country. We tried to heal that division. And that's another story I won't go into that today. I feel like now I'm becoming a professor and not. Other questions about, yes?
After the Revolutionary War, the property and lands of the king on which lands loyalists were seized. How did Trinity Church avoid that?
Good lawyers, I think. I mean, I'm serious. No, I'm serious about that. Yeah. But I mean, that was the fact that remained, as I've said, I think already in this, that helped to fuel a lot of what I talked about. Trinity money. Let's not get too mad at Trinity Church. Because at one point when I was a bishop upstate in Bishop Sisk, he saw that our churches, of course, were poorer than Manhattan churches. He said, maybe we'll get Trinity to do that again. Give us all some money for our little churches. It didn't work. and he was gone. So, but I mean, Trinity has been a great institute, but lots of other places, it was just the endowments were taken and the people were taken and they left. So, I mean, I think, maybe I'm too enthusiastic about it. I'm amazed that these leaders were able to save this church in the war. Yes?
You started out by talking about the two domes, American
yes.
capital,
The capital.
St. Peter's.
Yes.
How unusual is that structure in the Anglican Communion? In other words, the democratic element?
It's a good question. That's a very good question. I mean, it's present, obviously, in other churches. I mean, obviously, the Church of England, the power of the crown is not so great, but this is a legal thing. The Canadian church is like that as well. But think of one example of this is we don't use the word archbishop for the head of our church. We use the word presiding bishop still. It's always been voted down by the general. Why do we do that? Because again, that's giving this sense of almost, it's the people who really run everything. The presiding bishop is not over the Episcopal Church. What is over the Episcopal Church? The General Convention has the power to get rid of the presiding bishop if the presiding bishop or a diocesan bishop is out of order. And the Church of England even is more complicated about all that. So I didn't want to get too much involved in whether state churches are good or bad, because you might get upset. One more question, I think we have one more. Well, I will look forward to talking to you. So next week, it's about Ralph Adams Cram, who built that church. And it's some of the same things I've been talking about today. Freedom. The Episcopal Church is a church of freedom. We think of that as looking back to the Gothic Middle Ages, but for Cram, it was kind of a modernism, about a liberation. So I'm going to talk about the theme of liberation somewhat in Cram to his vision. So I hope you'll do that. And thank you so much for being here. When you start, you think there's nobody going to be here. And here you were. So I'm so glad that you were here.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So I will see you next week.
Yeah.
And I'll send a link with the video, so if you want to watch it again and hang out. Have a lovely Sunday.
Okay, we have to run off. I'm going to put on vestments, so.
Yeah, but if you stay for Mass after Mass,
I'll be,
it's
yes.
going to be a coffee hour.
Yes. So I'm not being unfriendly. I just got